let's consider the simplest possible Keynesian model. If any of you have taken macroeconomics, I'm sure you've talked about this model. The purpose of this model is to try to explain the equilibrium value of aggregate income in a simple economy. To explain whether national income is high or low. Or in other words, to try to understand the phenomena of depressions. During the 1930s, we were experiencing a depression. Even now, we're suffering through a severe recession. And the purpose of these simple models is try to understand this phenomena of the behavior of the aggregate economy better. And here's the simplest national income, or Keynesian. Let Y be national income for an entire economy. So it's the income of all the individuals within an economy. Okay? It's an aggregate income for an economy. And in equilibrium, national income will be equal to planned expenditures on goods and services. And goods and services are divided into the simple model into three categories. Consumption goods, goods that consumers purchase and consume. And we'll use a big C for that. So that's aggregate consumption expenditures for an economy. Another component of expenditure is expenditure on plant and equipment by businesses. And that's investment. But I stand for investment. And we're going to put a zero subscript here. The reason we're going to put a zero subscript here is that investment expenditures on plant and equipment are assumed to be determined exogenously. They're determined outside the model. Okay. The other component of expenditure is expenditure by the government. And government expenditures are also assumed to be exogenously determined. This equation right here is an equilibrium condition. In equilibrium, national income will be equal to planned expenditures by consumers, investors, and the government. In equilibrium, income equals expenditure. You can sort of think of this right-hand side as being demand for goods and services. And this left-hand side is kind of like, you could interpret that as being the supply. National income will be equal to the aggregate demand for goods and services. The other equation is a behavioral equation, which explains how consumption expenditures change. And here, consumption expenditures depend on the level of national income. Consumption is just assumed to be a linear function of whatever national income is, which makes sense. Think about it. So let's just call this linear function A plus BY. And this is a behavioral equation, and it's called a consumption function, because it explains the relationship between consumption expenditures and national. in this model, let's summarize. In this model, there are two equations, an equilibrium condition and the consumption function. There are four variables, y, c, I, and g. Two of these variables, y and c, are said to be endogenous variables. Endogenous variables are variables that are explained by the model. Endogenous variables, the value of endogenous variables is determined by the model. Y and C are endogenous variables. I and G are exogenous variables. Exogenous means their values are determined outside the model. And there are two parameters, A and B. A and B are parameters. Look at this equation. This parameter A is assumed to be, generally it's assumed to be positive. It is the intercept of the consumption function. If we were to graph this consumption function, it would look like this. Here's y, the dependent variable. Here's c, the dependent variable. And a is just this intercept right here. That's where consumption starts. The slope of the consumption function is b. So in this case, the consumption function is assumed to be a straight line. And the slope of this straight line is just b. One way to interpret A, the parameter A is sometimes said to be autonomous consumption. Autonomous consumption. It's just the consumption level you would have, consumers would have, if their national income went to zero. If income went to zero, consumers might still be able to consume some from their savings. If you had an income of zero, you might still be able to consume if you got some savings in the bank. You could draw down your savings. So, that's why it's typically assumed to be positive. Now, B, the meaning of this parameter B, in macroeconomics, did you discuss this? What is the meaning of this parameter B? Anybody remember from macroeconomics? Notice what it tells you. If income were to go up by $1, consumption would go up by that fraction B. Does that ring a bell? Yes?
The multiplier? Or the
Close. Close. Yeah, it's the MPC, not the multiplier, but what does MPC stand for?
Marginal.
Yes, marginal propensity to consume. B is the marginal propensity to consume. For example, if B were 0.8, then it would say if national income goes up by $1, consumption would go up by 80 cents. 0.8, or whatever the increase in income is, the marginal propensity. And B is assumed to be a fraction between 0 and 1. If your income goes up by $1, a certain fraction of that extra dollar will be spent on consumption and a certain fraction will be saved. So B is assumed to be between 0 and 1. 1 minus B would just be the savings, right? You either spend your money or you save it. So B is the marginal